We're back with another bite-sized entry to the Honored Madman lore library, and we've mentioned him multiple times in previous videos, but we're going to talk about him here specifically today, and I'm of course talking about the biggest simp in all of the lands between, Maleigh Marais of the Shaded Castle. And while certain characters like Blythe and Tanith certainly make pretty solid cases for themselves as to why they're also pretty big simps, the consequences of their obsessions were nowhere near as catastrophic as having your ancestral home taken over by a ruthless band of escaped criminals, cultists, Jedi, and mad scientists, which is exactly what happened to the Shaded Castle due to Marais' obsession with a certain demigod. We are, however, getting a little too far off ahead of ourselves, so let's start at the beginning. Maleigh Marais comes from the famous Marais family, a storied clan of executioners and stewards of the Shaded Castle. The men of the family were all secret followers of an old rot god, which is, of course, the very same rot god that was reincarnated into Maleigh, the one that will truly return after she blooms that third time. But given his family history, I think it's safe to say that any one of the men in his family would turn into a simp if their fabled rot god were reincarnated into a red-headed anime warrior woman, regardless of whether or not she was a walking WMD. I guess you could say he was genetically predisposed to being a simp. So this guy grew up with a poster of Maleigh on his wall, and when he was older, he presumably shirked his duties to fill the halls of his castle with Maleigh merch. Stuff like a metric fuck ton of gold prosthetic limbs. There was one he even treasured more than the rest that he kept in a little chest in one of the towers at the Shaded Castle. It was said that when he braced this particular prosthesis, that he could feel the warmth, or at least the presence, of his own personal goddess. That's pretty fucking cringe, bro. But anyway, because he spent so much time in this watchtower and not, executing prisoners, the dungeon started to fill up with some of the worst possible enemies imaginable. Wraithcallers, depraved perfumers, some guy with a barbed wire head and biotic implants. Definitely a bunch of these sort of unsavory types that were better executed almost as soon as they were imprisoned and captured. I mean, Elden of the Briar is a literal dark Jedi and serial killer. He only murders merchants. That dude should have been beheaded as soon as he was captured. But anyway, to the surprise of absolutely no one, a group of prisoners, undoubtedly led by Elden of the Briar, caused a classic prison riot and took over the Shaded Castle, forcing Maleigh Marais to flee into the nearby graveyard where he summoned up a guardian golem, but couldn't summon up the courage to go retake his castle. Presumably during the riot, Maleigh Marais also lost his storied family sword to the cone-headed bandit Jedi from Eoche that I mentioned earlier, who seems to have had it in his possession long enough to have tricked the blade out with barbed wire and MCU-style CGI effects. Oh yeah, and after Elden of the Briar managed to take over the castle with all of these escaped prisoners, he proceeded to go right back to serial killing. That's why he invades at least one merchant per region, but under his pseudonym, the Bell-Bearing Hunter. And I suppose it isn't even really Maleigh Marais' fault, since he was almost certainly indoctrinated by this rot cult by his father, and then just happened to exist in the same timeline as Maleigh, who was in fact the second coming, or perhaps just some kind of wicked experiment that was capable of reborning this rot outer god. There's any number of possibilities as to why his people blame him for what happened. It could be because this family was secretly followers of this rot god, meaning that the subjects, they weren't servants of rot. It could also be that when he took in these straggler clean rot knights, he ordered most of his servants and attendants to, see to them first, resulting in the castle being understaffed and a possible prison riot breaking out. Or perhaps they simply blame him for not executing Elden of the Briar before he took over the castle and murdered everybody. I think that one's the most likely. If you look around the Shaded Castle, one thing you might notice is the abundance of 4 different types of statue. One appears to be Marika, the other one appears to be Miquella, and another one appears to be Maleigh, while the 4th looks a bit to me like a deathbed companion. It appears to be dressed just like Fia, but that's just my interpretation. Now there's a metric fuck ton of these statues lying around the castle, and it appears that the escaped convicts are now in the process of moving them out. At least that's how it looks to me, with a big amount of them sort of littering the path to the main hall. It looks like they're moving them all out to this one little empty vacant field, more or less just outside the walls of the Shaded Castle. past a couple of scarlet Miranda flowers, and just outside of the poison moat. Interestingly enough, this is the very same field where we find the world's biggest simp, just sort of standing amidst all these ruined statues of, well, presumably people he worshipped. Now, my going theory was that he was either driven from the castle or escaped, but maybe he was sort of just, maybe he surrendered. And look, after seeing what Elmer of the Briar is capable of, I can't really blame Maleigh Marais for surrendering if he did indeed do that. But if that was the case, then perhaps he was exiled by these escaped cons and chose to set himself up out in that field with all the ruined statues. Maybe he's out there just reflecting or pondering on all of his many mistakes, or at the very least the actions that led up to him losing his castle and his family sword to a serial killer with force abilities. All while probably knowing that every single one of his subjects and the nobles under his command still blame him for the fall of the castle even after they've perished. Seriously, their ghosts even bitch about this dude. Now, his presence in this field could be due to a number of reasons. I'm doing a lot of speculating here. He could be out there because he's depressed that he heard Maleigh was killed. Or that could be why he hasn't summoned up the courage to go retake the castle. Because he's got nothing to live for. His god is dead. He probably thinks that's why all this bad shit's happened to him. That tends to be how the uber-religious tend to view situations like this. Now, where things get a little hazy is the presence of the Clean Rot Knights at the Shaded Castle. We don't really know when they showed up, and they could be stragglers that survived the ill-fated invasion of Caelid. Maybe they attempted to retreat back at the Hallowed Tree and were offered safe refuge at Shaded Castle and were trapped when the eventual prison riot erupted. It makes sense that the foremost Maleigh aficionado would want to have some Clean Rot Knights around. A lot of good it did him, though. But I'm trying to keep this one bite-sized, so I'm going to leave that off there. I believe I've established enough reasons as to why Maleigh is the biggest simp in Elden Ring. But anyway, if you liked that bite-sized ramble, please consider liking the video. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like my videos in general, please consider subscribing. And as always, here's the outro.